We're joined by our Minister over here for Safeguarding, Victoria Atkins, right now. Victoria Atkins, thank you for joining us this morning. I wonder if we could get your reaction to what we've seen coming out of Israel, a religious festival that was happening because lockdown restrictions have been lifted, and suddenly, rather than the 10,000 people they were expecting to turn up, nearly 100,000 people turned up as a means of expressing their enjoyment and their relief of being out of lockdown. But sadly, this tragedy has now occurred.
Well, thank you. Good morning, Ben. And the scenes are so distressing. And of course, our thoughts are very much with people at the scene who were affected by this. And of course, the Foreign Office will in due course be speaking to our counterparts in Israel to see if there's anything that can be done to help.
I mean, it was the scale of the numbers that turned up, the numbers of people who were just keen, having lockdown, having been lifted, to be able to get outside and experience being with each other and celebrate this religious festival. There is a sort of a warning, of course, for us as we are lifting lockdown and all the sort of the emergence of everybody. We are all very keen to get out and about, to see our families, to reconnect with our communities. And if things aren't policed carefully, then things can go wrong.
Indeed, and look, we all understand, I'm sure we can understand that utterly human wish, emotion to see other people, to see friends, families and loved ones. And it's why I hope that people understand why we're taking such a cautious approach, but irreversible approach to the easing of lockdown. We want to do this safely. We want to do it in a way that we're measuring the data on infections and things like that very carefully. But we're very hopeful that the roadmap is laid out and the end is in sight. But of course, our thoughts are very much with the people that we're seeing in the pictures that are emerging today.
It also, I would imagine, makes all those organisers of any gathering think twice and look at the provisions and the instructions that government has laid down for holding that safely. And if you look at the front page of the Daily Mirror, which of course went to print long before these awful events emerged, their headline is "Get out and have fun," because they're quoting a senior expert in COVID saying if you've had 2 vaccines, you can feel very confident to get out and have fun. It's a complicated message, isn't it? Can we be sure that the practicals are in place?
Yeah, it is complicated. You're quite right. And the measures have been very, very carefully thought through. I mean, you know, our amazing police officers have conversations every day with people about what they, you know, are they quite following the rules or not? And it's really, you know, it's our responsibility on ourselves, as well as, of course, the work of the police and event organisers and so on, to ensure that such large events are very happy events. But as I say, a great deal of planning is going into this. Huge amount in terms of larger events. But again, it doesn't take away, although we have that in the UK, of course, it doesn't take away from the terrible, terrible scenes that we're seeing on our TV screens this morning.
Coming back to other domestic policy here, of course, and the distraction, Victoria Atkins, that is occurring because of the ongoing interest in the finance of the Prime Minister's apartment on Downing Street. There is a situation here, isn't there, where there is an official inquiry is now being launched by the Electoral Commission. They consider there to be something needs looking at. There needs to be an explanation as to what happened with the finance of this apartment. The question that we've not been able to get, and Keir Starmer tried on a number of occasions to get from the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's questions, was who paid initially. We know that the Prime Minister has paid the money in the end for the apartment, but who paid initially to put that money up front to be able to do the redecoration of the apartment? Because there's an inherent issue with whoever put that money there and why they gave him the money. Were they getting some sort of favours in return, isn't it? And until the Prime Minister is willing to give us that answer, do you think we're ever going to be able to get away from this?
Well, actually, I'm very grateful that you've referred to sort of other events this week because, of course, the reason I'm here is to talk about the Domestic Abuse Act, which is a huge piece of legislation that will help 2.3 million victims of domestic abuse across the country and their children. And as Minister for Safeguarding, that's been my piece of work over the last 3 years. And that's been the focus of my attention this week, to be honest. But in terms of the other matters that you've talked about, the Prime Minister has set out his answers very clearly in the House of Commons.
But he didn't answer that question, did he? That one crucial question. Who paid initially?
Well, he answered questions, and as you say, the Leader of the Opposition spent a great deal of time talking about this, but he answered questions. He's paid for the refurbishment.
But he didn't answer that question, did he? That one question, which is what all this hinges on. If he were to say straight up, look, at the time I didn't have the money, so I borrowed some money from one of our donors, it was wrong and I've broken a few rules, but I've paid for it all now, then actually surely that would have put it all to bed. The fact that he hasn't, and he's done everything he can to not answer that question, means that we're all still intrigued and it feels like there's something else going on.
Well, Ben, if I may for a moment, I'm not sure. Well, we're doing a lot of campaigning across the country at the moment because obviously we've got local elections, really important elections next Thursday on the 6th of May. And I'm not sure it's getting quite the pickup that perhaps it is in Westminster.
I think you're right. And in fact, on this programme, we ran a poll, very simple, do you care? And the majority voted in that poll said, no, they don't really care. The problem is you're here to talk about an important piece of work that you've been doing for the last 3 years about something very important, domestic abuse, which we all want tackled. And all the headlines and all the chat is about who paid for the wallpaper and cushions at Downing Street. And you'd think if the Prime Minister wanted us all to look at these things that the government is working on, he would just answer it. And the fact that he's not makes people think there's something to hide.
Well, let's change that. Let's talk about the Act. This story's been rolling for a few days now. I can't add to anything that the Prime Minister has said in the House of Commons.
You must be cross about it, though. You must be thinking, oh, just answer, get it out the way, if there's nothing to hide.
Yeah, no, I can't add to what the Prime Minister has said. He set it out really clearly. He's appointed Lord Geit as the independent advisor, these reviews will take their course. There's nothing I can add to what has already been said this week. And as you say, there's been so much going on just in the last few days on all sorts of pieces of legislation. But the one that I'm most focused on is the Domestic Abuse Act, because that's the piece of legislation that's going to last for years, and it's going to help millions of people across the country, including people who may be watching at the moment who are living in very, very difficult circumstances.
It was first mentioned, wasn't it, 4 years ago in the Queen's speech? It's taken a long time to get to this point. Are you confident that actually it's going to be able to protect those people it most needs to protect, people who find themselves in domestic violence situations and other situations?
It has been, yes, I am, and it has been. I mean, it's been buffeted around with all sorts of external political events. But what's been really, really heartening is that actually there's been real parliamentary support across both houses for this bill. We've been, as government, very, very much in listening mode, very much listening to ideas and proposals, and indeed some of the amendments, the really important amendments that we've made to the bill, have been because, for example, I sat down with some clinicians and listened to the experiences that they're seeing in their sexual assault referral centres and the use by perpetrators of non-fatal strangulation. These are really difficult topics at this time in the morning, I appreciate, but there are some really, really powerful measures in this bill that will help not just victims of domestic abuse, but actually extend even to one-night stands and first dates that where these practices are perhaps used. So it's a really, really landmark bill. We're introducing a revolutionary duty on local councils to provide specialist services for people who have had to flee their homes and are in refuge. We're setting up the Office of the Domestic Abuse Commissioner to hold us all to account. But of course, sitting at the heart of the bill is that definition, which makes it clear that domestic abuse can be committed in all sorts of ways, not just physical violence, but also emotional and economic and sexual abuse. And that's, I think, critical to our national understanding of domestic abuse and how we can all help people who are having to live with it.
OK, it is a hugely important bill. Thank you very much for talking to us this morning.